Okay, so we're just going to start from the top and work through this flow chart. It's sort of a game tree, although not technically. And this won't be a rigorous game theoretical explanation, but it'll be pretty close. Okay, so let's get started. So first of all, there's two parties. There's the initiator and there's the responder. We're going to think about the initiator as the user. That's what we'll be designing. Well, there'll be two different pages that each of these parties uses, but for now we're going to think of the initiator as the user, and we're going to think of the responder as a worker that just kind of shows up to service this, although we will talk about why he shows up. So, the initiator wants to exchange 100 DAI for 100 US dollars. He's also willing to include 10 DAI for fast service. So he's going to create this contract, which right now we're calling an uncoining contract. He's going to put the 100 DAI in plus the 10 DAI of the bonus. Now, once it's open, there's two things that can happen. Also, you'll note that everything that's in red is something that the responder can choose to do. Everything that's in blue is an action that the initiator can begin. And these are, everything that's a diamond is a smart contract call. So you see that in the open state there, the initiator can recall, and he can do this as long as it's open, and then he just gets all of his money back, pretty simple. But he can only do that if nobody has committed, because once the responder commits, it moves to the commit stage. The commit is something that the responder can do, well, anybody can do to become the responder, and they commit by putting in a deposit. In this case, we're going to say that it's 30 DAI deposit. So again, there's two things that can happen here. We can just recall, not very interesting. It's just sort of a canceling of the offer. Or a commit can happen. Now, once the commit happens and it moves past the open stage, the open phase, this recall is no longer possible. The initiator is committed, as is the responder, and the initiator is no longer guaranteed to get his money back. So, once the initiator sees that the contract has moved to the committed phase, and that might be through a notification, or it might be through just by watching the page, then the initiator is going to send the responder any information necessary to transfer the US $100. So that could be a bank account number, or it could be a cash drop location, or somewhere to meet in person to actually do the cash swap. And once he does that, the responder is expected to actually make that deposit, so that could be going to the bank or dropping the cash somewhere, and then they call claim. Now they can also, first of all, the committed phase, you'll see the only two actions that are available are the ones that the responder can do. So once it's committed, the initiator just kind of waits. I mean, they do have to do the action of sending the responder any extra info, but as far as interaction with the contract, there's not really anything that the initiator can do. It's all up to the responder. And we would expect the responder is going to perform the deposit in that time. Once he performs the deposit, he would click claim. Well, first let's talk about this option here. If the responder fails to call a claim, then we get something that's a little bit like a recall, but it also punishes the responder. So 110 DAI is returned to the initiator, just like in a recall, but half of the responder's DAI, which in this case is 15 DAI, is burned, and half of it is sent to the responder. And that's as a punishment for basically wasting the initiator's time. So the responder would want to claim if he expects the initiator to release. I guess we'll get to that in a second. But for now, let's just assume that the responder gets the claim. And let's also assume that he's also made the deposit. He only wants to click claim once the deposit is made, because he knows that once he clicks claim, here you can see only the initiator has options here, and he wants to make sure the initiator is happy once we get to this point. And the reason he wants to do that is that once we move to the claimed phase, there are two options available to the initiator. He can burn or he can release. If the initiator is happy, he's going to release. In other words, if he's looked at his bank account and he's seen that the $100 is there, or he's gone to the cash drop location and found the cash, then he will click release. If he hasn't found it, if there is no money, if it seems to be a scam, then he's going to want to burn. Obviously, this is not a happy scenario, but and we'll get to why this is actually unlikely to ever occur. But for the purposes of game theory, we have to explore that if it gets to the point where there's a claimed state but the initiator has not found the money, and it seems like the responder has not actually even made the deposit, the initiator is going to want to punish the responder, and that's why we can rely on this. Bring it back up a little bit. So, of these two options here, the initiator is only going to release if he sees the money in his account. Now, there's also a countdown timer on this state, and that can be 1 day or 3 days or a month or whatever the settings of the contract are. But that will automatically release the responder. So the responder knows that the only way that he will not get the money is if by the time we get to this claimed state, the initiator is upset. That's the only way that this burn option will be called. And so yeah, if they call burn, maybe I didn't spell it out. If they call burn, the die is burned, nobody gets it. And if they call release, if the initiator calls release, then the entire balance is released to the responder, and that gives them a 10 die profit because they've put 30 die in, so they get, and they've also deposited the US $100, so they're down 130 die, and they get back 140 die, so that's where the 10 die profit comes back to the responder. What else to go over? So let's talk a little bit more about the game theory. Now, again, as I said, once we get to the claim state, the initiator is going to burn if the responder has not made the fiat transfer because he'll be upset and want to punish the responder. You can also, and that's sort of the emotional argument, you can also argue that, to make it more game theoretically rigorous, you could argue that the initiator will want to burn if there is no deposit and that would dissuade future attempts at scamming. So that would actually build a reputation that the initiator isn't a sucker, to put it plainly. And so he will make this burn-release decision not only on the basis of emotion, but if he's some cold-hearted, rational agent, he'll also make the burn-release decision based on his building a good reputation, and in which case he would want to release if and only if the fiat transfer has actually taken place, and he'll want to burn if and only if the fiat transfer has not taken place. So now, looking at this scenario, the responder is only going to commit, they're only going to put this service deposit in if they expect this outcome. Nobody would commit if they expect this outcome, because then the responder would just lose 30 die. They also would not commit if they expect this outcome, because they do get some of their die back, but they still lose half of it. So the only reason that a responder would enter into this at all is if they expect this outcome to happen. And the only way that they could expect that outcome to happen is if they expect that by the time we get to this phase, the initiator is happy with what they've done. And so, reasoning about that, now the initiator, when he creates this, you can know that either it's going to remain open, at which point he can always just recall, or someone will commit, and that committed person will be incentivized and confident about the ability to work with the initiator, work together to get to this phase. And this is all, that all works without any trust between these two people. It's just about game theory and incentives. I think that is about it. Another note is that this 10 die bonus fee, an initiator could create it without that, and the responder still might respond if he simply just wants to trade his US dollars for the die. So if they both just want the trade to happen, then the initiator could open this without any fee at all, and a responder could still respond and go through this whole thing. And in fact, an initiator could try that first. He could try to create it with 100 die straight with no bonus to just see if somebody shows up. If not, he could cancel it and then reopen it. He can, recall. He can recall it, get his die back, and then he can reopen it and include more of a bonus. Anything else to cover here? I guess I'll just go over the typical use from either perspective. So from the initiator is going to go and open a contract, deposit the money, however much they want to, uncoin plus an optional bonus fee. They're going to wait, watch the page, or watch for a notification on when a commit happened. Once the commit happens, they will communicate additional information to the responder about how to transfer money to them. And And then once they see that the responder has claimed they've made the deposit, they're going to check to make sure the deposit is there, and if it is, they'll release to the responder. Now, because of the game theory, that should almost always happen, but in the case that it doesn't, in the case that they don't actually receive the fiat, they will have to burn money, which is a sad story. But the game theory, just the threat of this burn here, should make that scenario quite unlikely. And then, so the responder, a typical cycle of this is that the responder will be watching for these offers. And it's sort of in the same way that an Uber driver watches for offers on his phone. They're just sort of waiting for a chance to make money. And so they'll see this list, and some of the items, some of the contracts on the list will be offers that they can service. And they'll be looking at, when the initiator creates this in the first place, they include information about how they can receive fiat. So the initiator might open up a contract and include some information saying, I accept deposits at American Bank X or whatever, different banks, or they might say, I accept deposits in the form of cash drops within 100 kilometers of New York City, something like that. And so the responder is going to look through those and see offers with fiat transfer methods that he's able to work with. And once he sees one of those, he's going to commit to it by putting his deposit in. And then once he's committed, he's going to get information from the initiator about how to actually make that fiat transfer. He'll make the fiat transfer, click the claim button, and then wait for the initiator to release it. And again, the only reason he would commit in the first place is if he expects to be able to get to that place. In fact, the only way that both of these parties will show up at all is that they expect to get to this place, because everything else is painful. So, yeah, I think that's about it.